everyone, and welcome to this latest video. In this series we're going to be tackling a variety of different football terms and trying to give you the very simplified explanation, but we're going to still go into detail, so don't you worry. And we're going to be looking at the what is it, why would you use it, when would you use it, and who would you want to use in it. So we're going to be doing a number of these over the coming weeks if you enjoy this content. But this week we're going to be starting with cover 3, the well-known defensive coverage. Before we jump into it, I just quickly wanted to highlight we've just launched a new Patreon. In that, for $3.75, you'll get full access to additional college football breakdowns. We can see that you're enjoying our NFL breakdowns. We'll be posting all of our college football breakdowns on the Patreon, all included within that $3.75. You'll get full access to our 100+ scouting report database that we've compiled on NFL and college prospects, getting yourself ready for the NFL and college season. And you'll get full access to all of these materials. So, quick plug for our Patreon there. We would love for you to join and help support the channel and all of the work that we do here. So, let's get right into it. So, cover 3. What is it? If you strip it all back, what is cover 3 and why is it important? So, it is a zone defensive coverage play. You see a lot it being talked about as a full scheme, but at its root, it's a play. It's a play that even, for example, the Seahawks of the mid-2010s or the 49ers of the turn of the last decade, they would use it 40 to 45% of the time at most, right? It's a weapon to use in a defensive scheme. It's not the only play that you would use. So let's just make sure we understand that first and foremost. It's a play, not an entire scheme. But what is cover 3? Very, very simply, the 3 after the word cover implies 3 deep defenders. So you'll typically have 1 safety and 2 corners, or it might be 2 safeties and a corner. And it's their responsibility to cover a third of the field downfield. We'll show you a diagram in a moment. That then leaves the other remaining defenders to cover underneath and rush the passer in any combination that the coordinator likes. So this is cover 3 visualized. So this is against a 4 wide receiver set. As I mentioned before, we've got at the top of the screen, we've got our downfield coverage. We've got a third, and a third. So we've got our corner, and we have our free safety. This should be fairly comfortable, I think, to most of you watching, where we've got that bracket 3 at the top. We have a nickel corner, and we have a strong safety in on this play because we have a 4 wide receiver set. We've got 2 linebackers, the Will and the Mike, and a 4 down line. We'll show you a lot more variations going forward, but it's important to get the basics right. So let's talk about why to use cover 3. So the important thing that it does is it provides a good protection against deep passing concepts. Having the middle of field closed by having that single high safety really protects the middle of the field, and you've got the sideline protected better than if you were to have a cover 2 look, for example. In a cover 3 system, in a cover 3 play system, it is a read and react defense. It makes the ability of all the defenders, to really read and respond to what the offense is doing, and it keeps the ball in front of them. So it's not a backs turned, it's a eyes forward system. So it allows all of the defenders to keep their eyes on the QB and react to what he's doing, and what, importantly, the passing concept might be doing as well. It also allows for a mixture of corners. I think when we see and think about cover 3, we immediately go to those mid-2010 Seahawks and think of the long press corner. You can use those, but you can use off-aligned corners as well in the cover 3. So it does have that variability in the scheme. So why you shouldn't use cover 3. So it is vulnerable to short passes. There's no getting around it. By having 3 defenders deep, you're going to have a shortfall somewhere else. Either you're compromised to the sideline or compromised in between the hook and curl zones. It's just going to happen. You know, you can only have a certain amount of bodies in those spots. And it might also compromise your pass rush. If, for example, you want to play with 5 underneath defenders and only rush 3, you're really limiting your ability in that instance. So it is vulnerable to short passes, so for that reason we would say it's not very good on quick passing type situations. So second and third and short, for example, where you need a 4 and 5 yard gain to a tight end, for example. The cover 3 could be exposed in those type of situations, whether it be against a slant or a curl or a hitch or an over, for example. You know, those type of quick hitting routes that can expose some gaps in zone coverages. Another reason you shouldn't use it is outside corners can be targeted in this. So cover 3 pretty much isolates those outside corners, those 2 defensive corners, against a single receiver. And particularly when it's a out or straight route, so we've listed a few there, so verticals, fades, comebacks and outs, the corner is on his own. And if he's got some susceptibility to being beaten on those routes, cover 3 doesn't particularly help him. Therefore, not a particularly great answer there. And finally, why you shouldn't use it. Like only 4 underneath defenders, that does create those voids for the talented interior receivers to use. And particularly, you know, it doesn't help you stop a quote-unquote dink and dunk offense. I mean, the best offenses are dink and dunk, but, you know, those chain-moving offenses, the cover 3 probably isn't the best response to those continuing hits, you know, over the middle. So when to use cover 3, very effective on long down and distances, or when playing with a lead. It's quite a safe coverage in general, particularly if you're playing with off corners. It's very effective if you have a talent advantage at outside corner, because if you can isolate that 1-on-1 and say you've got the hash marks outwards covered off, or sorry, the numbers covered off outwards, I should say, by your corners, you can really focus that energy and that zone responsibility inside the numbers and start to squeeze the field and narrow the field. That's why it's so effective when you have a Darrell Revis or a Richard Sherman or a Sauce Gardner, for example, this year, who has that talent advantage to play a cover 3 third field easily. That it just enables a lot more scheme versatility. And it also highlights a playmaking free safety. It's no accident you think of Earl Thomas when you think of a playmaking free safety, you know, of that 2010s Seattle team, which we'll be talking a lot about in this video. But it would also suit the likes of Ed Reed, etc. You know, the guys that can gamble outside of their zone, and to be honest, a free safety does need to be able to do that in this scheme for him to be effective. So, we've talked about the base cover 3. Let's just remind ourselves of that. And we're going to show you some variations, because cover 3 is not a static look. So, even with this personnel package, you could run cover 3 tens of ways, right? In terms of adapting and rotating your coverage. Let's show an example of that. So in this screen, we've got a rotation to the weak side. So the strong side would be designated as this side because the runner is most likely to head in this direction. And with the H tight end aligned, whilst he isn't aligned tight to the formation, he's still very much close enough to the formation to maybe do a crack block or something. This would be, in my opinion, how the direction you designate strong side if you had that in your scheme. So the rotation weak side away, we've got the strong side safety here. And let's just follow a couple of things. So this defensive corner has the same responsibility up here. But what we've got is the free safety rolling to the weak side of the field. We have the strong side safety filling in behind him as the middle of the field responsibility. And instead of covering a third, the defensive corner gets to squat and sit down in a quarter, flat zone, underneath. The other guys are ultimately doing something similar. The Mike has got a tougher job because instead of covering very much close to his responsibility. He's got to get over and cover in the flats. So that does create strain on the defense. But ultimately, you can be as creative as you want to be with the cover three. It grants you a lot of different variation. And it's not just a single high formation as well, as we see with this diagram. So we think of cover three and we think of those two high corners and we think of the single high free safety. But it more than capably can be used out of a two high system. In fact, a two high system actually gives more flexibility and more variations for how you could use it. In this example, we've got those four underneath defenders. We've got the nickel corner dropping into the flats. We've got these hook and curl zones covered by the Will and Mike. Got the corner coming down to the flats, and then the strong safety covering that third responsibility, and the free safety covering the middle of the field. So you have a lot of opportunities and variations to use the cover three, and we'll talk about the types of personnel that fit it in a very short bit. But so how does it work against different formations? Ultimately the same. So here we've dropped it in against a two tight end formation, clear strong side here, where we've got a Y and H tight end aligned. Our strong safety to run fit would be a lot closer to the line of scrimmage, and ultimately it's the same thing, right? We've also applied a defensive corner into a press man role, just so you can visualize it from that perspective as well. This defensive corner is in a more of a squat outlook, but essentially they're going to end up in the same place, but their techniques will have to change. We will talk about that in a very short bit. So principle still holds, four underneath defenders in general, but if you want to have more than four underneath defenders, you're going to have to sacrifice a pass rusher. For the for the consequences and meaning of this video, we won't be talking about three-man lines and stunts and focusing on the defensive line too much. We just want to focus on the back seven. And then we've got those three deep guys behind. So let's talk about personnel. So first and foremost, I like to talk about safeties when talking about coverages, back to front. I think one of the key things the defence has to get a handle on is, are we a one high or two high scheme? And that can be based on a number of factors. It can be whether the defense is a good pass rushing team. It could be on the talent level of the safeties. It could be on the talent level of the corners. It could be on their ability to stop the run. All of these factors come together. But ultimately, you decide as a defensive coordinator whether you want to be a single high or two high team. And that dictates a lot of your choices. In this example, we'll be focusing a bit more on the single high prototype, I guess. But this is just, again, an exercise. There are so many variations in the cover three. But these are the types of things you would look for when playing the cover three play. What kind of attributes and traits would you want from your defenders? So focusing on free safety first of all, that's that playmaking, middle of the field, free safety type. Now, obviously, for that, they'd need to have good zone playmaking instincts. They'd have to be very strong at reading the eyes of the QB and gambling to make a play. It's very easy for a middle of the field free safety to really do very little in a game, because smart QBs and smart offensive coordinators play off him. If he's going to be sitting back in a deeper coverage, that opens up space between the linebackers and the safeties in this area here. Let me take you back. So this area here, right? This space between the free safety and the Will and the Mike, that immediately creates opportunity. If he's too eager and sits in this gap, that opens up space for a post potentially on the outside, or a seam, or the four verticals play, for example, to really take advantage of that. So the free safety has to be able to read the game well, first and foremost. Now, athleticism is a great backup to that instincts. I mean, I'd always rather have the playmaking instincts and the athleticism to follow rather than the other way around, because you have to be able to react quickly and break on the ball to be good in college or the NFL, frankly, playing that role. We want someone who's really tenacious and aggressive when attacking the ball. in these situations, you're going to be coming at high velocity and coming into likely contested situations as a free safety. So you've got to have someone who has that physical toughness to really engage and, be almost cavalier with the way they attack the ball. And they need to be a reliable tackler. Ultimately, they're the last line of defence. You need to rely that they will hold their ground when needed. And I picked out Jesse Bates, the images there, as someone who epitomises this in the modern day. Just an excellent playmaking free safety now of the Atlanta Falcons after his free agent move. Great playmaker in that capacity. Now we move over to the strong safety, and we put a slash slot safety because in terms of the positional requirements, it's pretty similar in terms of the strong safety in this scheme and a nickel corner slash slot safety. So for the sake of that, for the time, we'll keep them together. And we've highlighted Derwin James here, the playmaking. I don't think you could really pigeonhole him in a position, but he's probably more of a safety than a corner, but he can play a lot of different things, of the Los Angeles Chargers. And you want to have someone in this position who has got loose hips, first and foremost. Now, just actually before I get into the position, you may be thinking Derwin James doesn't quite fit that Seattle Seahawks prototype of the Cam Chancellor, the 6'4", big, hard-hitting tackler. I think, for me, the way the league's going in terms of hits and penalties, it's important that hard hitting isn't the only thing you do, and for that reason, size isn't as important. It's a plus as size and length always is. But I think to survive these days in the cover three, you want to have loose hips. You want to have a very good feel in your zone. So if you're particularly for a strong safety, if they're playing in the underneath zones, which is what they'd be doing a lot of the time, can they adjust and adapt to the different concepts? Because they're going to have to process a lot more quickly in those tight spaces. They're going to need to have that quick agility to close on in and around the ball. And they ultimately, the more versatility and speed and athleticism they have enables you as a play caller to do a lot more things with them. So in the variations I showed before, does he have the 4-4 speed to rotate back to play a single high safety role from the box? Can he do that? If he can, that allows you to do a lot more fun stuff. Now, it's a tough thing to do, but it's fun stuff. And finally, and the run game, we haven't talked too much about the run game, and to be honest, that's not it's a bit of an oversight, because the run game itself and probably deserves a whole video on how to defend the run out of the cover three. But for the sake of this, the strong safety needs to be that 8th defender when required. Sometimes he needs to be that 7th defender, particularly against wide splits, light formations, so full wide receiver set. You'd probably be looking for your strong safety to be that 7th defender after the 4 defensive linemen, or 3 defensive linemen and 3 linebackers, whatever scheme you're running. But the 6 box defenders, you'd ideally want him to be that 7th or 8th guy. So he needs to be able to take on a block, shed it, and get after the ball carrier in the backfield. It'd also be nice for a bit of a blitzing threat to come from that type of position. Again, for more variance. Corners. So let's talk about the stars, in my opinion, of the cover three. When we think of press corner in the cover three, you think of Richard Sherman straight away. You think of that length, that aggressiveness, that tenacity, that ability to track downfield, and he epitomises all of that. So he has got really good length to jam, which is what you really need. If you now ultimately playing press, you can play right up close to the receiver, which we call on the line, or you can play slightly off and operate a soft press. Regardless of what technique you use, it helps to have long arms. Long arms means you can close a greater distance, you can keep a greater distance from the receiver and allow yourself to adjust on the fly. So it just enables you to get your hands on the receiver ultimately and control and disrupt the timing of the route. Secondly to that, ultimately you're going to need speed. If you're going to be operating out press alignment, you're going to have to be responsible for a sideline fade, a deep route, a comeback, for example. Those type of routes where you're really challenged one-on-one, even though it's zone coverage, because you're going to be tracking that receiver downfield. So you need to have that step-for-step foot speed. And then finally, at the catch point, first of all, is ball tracking. We see a lot of athletic, long defenders, and we think automatically they can play this type of role, but they can't, because they can't turn their heads and track the ball and time their disruption attempt at the catch point. So that is imperative to survive at this position. And again, that catch point physicality, we need to have someone who really gets their hands up in between the hands of the receivers, smashes the ball out of their hands, disrupts potential receptions, and generates incompletions. Now, off corner, you're looking for somewhat similar things. Length is a plus, as it always is, as we said earlier. But ball tracking is slightly different. With an off corner, they're typically playing 7 to 10 yards off the line of scrimmage. They're playing with an outside leverage, which means they've got their back more towards the sideline than downfield. So their body posture is a bit more open. And what they're doing is they're reading the field through to the QB. Right? They want to keep their eyes on what the QB is doing with one eye and reading what the concept is on their side with the other. So if they're playing against a particular set of receivers, they're reading what they're doing, they're reading the eyes of the QB and adapting accordingly. So you need to have a very smart player, a very reactive player. And I immediately thought of Trevon Diggs. We scouted him earlier. There's a video that we've done on Trevon Diggs, and he's one of the best at this. Really good concept awareness. Ultimately then, once you've ID'd it, it's about the burst and click to close. So closing the distance on that, just as the ball arrives, knocking the ball away, generating those incompletions. And part of that burst is you need those loose hips and that short area quickness. Particularly if you're asking your off corner to rotate down and play the flats, they'll be tested a bit more in terms of their quickness when they're not playing with a bracket over the top. So a couple of things to look for there. And then finally, in terms of personnel, let's look at linebackers. For the sake of this, again, we'll be putting Mike and Sam together. In terms of the cover three, particularly these days, you'll be ultimately mostly playing with a two-man linebacking core, just based on the amount of receivers that are playing. But in terms of the Sam, when you are playing against heavy fronts, you'd be looking for pretty much the same traits here in terms of their ability to operate the cover three. So first off, defending the run, they've got to be able to do their share. If anything, it's more important that they can take on a block and beat them, because there isn't that protection behind. If you think about the defensive corners and the safeties retreating downfield, it puts a greater onus on the linebacking core to seal off and make sure that the run game is held in check, so that you don't have to drop in another guy as a precaution. So very important that they're able to take on a block, shed, and make that move on the ball carrier. Foot speed is an absolute must in the ability to add versatility. Look at Fred Warner here. He's the type of player that, one of those rare players at the middle linebacker spot who could, if you wanted him to, on occasion, drop back into that middle of the field look. He has that rare athlete. Not saying you want to do that every down, but you've got that capability with him to do it. You then want the zone instincts and flow. So you want the ability to adapt your zone coverage as the concepts come in to your area. So you pick up and pass off receivers as they come into and through your zone. So you have to have that ability and feel of the defense to make sure that you're not leaving gaps open as you move and adjust. And ultimately, you know when to jump and try and intercept or deflect the pass. And again, broken record, length is a plus, just because from a zone coverage perspective, particularly at the linebacker, a quarterback's going to be throwing over your head. If there's opportunities for you to jump up and deflect the pass when the QB is throwing into a tight window or is under pressure, then that just generates more opportunities for tip passes, turnovers, and pass deflections. And finally, looking at the will, we've highlighted Oloquan from the Jaguars. Another really good instance of a sensible linebacker who's got speed, who's got instincts. And just wanted to highlight with the will versus the Mike, going to be doing a lot more sideline pursuit in this scheme. So you want to see that ability to sift through traffic and hunt down ball carriers. We looked at, for example, a number of players in the channel. Devin White was the name that really came to mind. It's that player that can do that sideline to sideline hustle, and really shows that ability to sift through traffic and smash the ball carrier down and secure him down. That's what you want to see out of your will, that real pursuit and hunger to go and hunt down the football. And again, we want to see that catch point disruption. So, right, guys, that is it for this summary of the cover 3. If you liked this, or if you had any comments, please put them in the comment section below. It really helps us get better and understand how to adjust and give you guys the content that you're after. Please like this video if you've enjoyed what you've seen, and subscribe to the channel to help support us. So thank you so much. We'll check you on the next one.